Hello there. This is October the 15th, 2022, and I have a question from Tracy in California. If you have any questions for me, please do send them directly to me to my personal email, aaron@aaronbudgen.net. That's AARON BUDJEN.net, and the Aaron just before the @aaronbudgen. And I'll do my best to answer a question you may have and perhaps give you a different point of view from what you would receive otherwise. But at this time, I have one from Tracy, and the question is about John the Baptist and Elijah. The question is regarding the end time Elijah. Just a question: isn't the end time Elijah supposed to restore all things and turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, etc.? What did John the Baptist restore? And inherent within this question is, did John the Baptist really fulfill what we would expect Elijah to accomplish? And that's what happens, is that we start out with this definition or this idea or this belief regarding what is Elijah really going to do? What does it mean to actually accomplish this? And then it's easy for us to kind of create this idea in our minds of what we expect to see. And if this is not what happened to our satisfaction, well, then it hasn't happened yet. So you have to kind of be careful with regards to your definition of exactly what you expect to see. So to start with, I'm going to go to the prophecy itself, which is found in Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, God said, "Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." All right, now there's a lot that can be, said about this. For example, he says, I want things to be different, or I'm going to strike the earth with a curse. So let's have Elijah come and restore all things. Before I do that, However, he says in verse 5, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." To say great and dreadful day, that can give the impression that there's some kind of cursing going on. All right? So just because there may be some sense of restoration, lest the earth be stricken with a curse, it still could be stricken with a curse, and you may have this great, dreadful day that takes place. All right? And so it can be easy to look at the prophecy and say, all right, God said that he's going to send Elijah the prophet before things get really bad, but, well, things are going to get really bad, all right, anyway. And so just in these few verses by themselves, you can get the idea that even though there may be a prophet who arrives, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to be perfect as we might want it to be. All right? And because he says, remember the law of Moses, and that the hearts of the fathers will be to the children, and the hearts of the children will be to the fathers, that there will be a social change. There is a description of this taking place. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work out in a perfect sense, such that we avoid the great and dreadful day that is coming. All right? He says that this is coming, and he's going to send Elijah beforehand. So you could say that this is going to happen, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be all in the sense of everyone, so that we have a state of perfection such that everyone is now living in obedience to the Mosaic law. It doesn't give that impression to me that necessarily everyone is going to experience that, especially when there's going to be a great and dreadful day, an expression of judgment. So he says that he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be everyone. It just means that there will be some who will experience this. Now, this is part of the Mosaic law, because in the Mosaic law, in several places, the Lord said that we are to teach our children. All right? Now, what do you teach your children? You teach them the law. That's what you teach them, all right, as part of the Old Covenant, which has to do with explaining to them what is good and what is evil. Now, there are two different parts to this relationship. And it says the fathers in this context, because it's generally accepted that it is the responsibility of the father to make sure that the children are taught in preparation to be a part of society. All right? Because in general, the fathers are a part of society more than the mothers are. The mothers are looking after the kids. What are the fathers doing? They're out there interacting with society. And part of interacting with society is discovering the expectations of society, all right, in terms of what kind of work is being done, what are the standards of work, what are the standards of relationships, all right, how do we establish contracts with other people and fulfill them. This is something that the fathers are normally involved in much more than the mothers are. And so there's a bias in this regard, all right, which can make sense when you look at the dynamics of family structures and how tasks and responsibilities tend to get divided up. So there's an emphasis that the fathers have the responsibility of making sure that the children are better prepared to become a part of the society that they need to be a part of. And so the fathers have the responsibility to do this. But just because the fathers will teach the children the law, and the expectations and good and evil, just because they do that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the children are going to be receptive to that. That's the other part of the relationship. And so it is a role that a person should fulfill of making sure that, the parents should make sure that the children are well informed about the expectations of civilization and society and are prepared to be part of civilization and society. But, the children have to do their part also. They have to be receptive to this, and they have to conform to what it is that they are required to do and expected to do, or they are going to have trouble, especially when they become a part of civilization and society. All right? The rules might be a little different at home, but, you get out there in the world and it's not necessarily going to play out the way that you thought it would or the way that you were accustomed to experiencing in the household. And the household will eventually dissolve because the parents will eventually die. It's just usually how it plays out. And so the idea of, the hearts of the fathers turning towards the children, that is a way of saying that, the parents will be a little bit more involved in teaching the law to the children. But the other part is that the children's hearts will be turned to the fathers, and they will be receptive and responsive, and they'll be responsible, for their role as well. This is the law. This is part of the law, part of the Old Covenant. All right? And the prophecy says that Elijah is going to encourage that this take place, and that this will take place in a meaningful way because of the presence of Elijah, and it will be in a way that will be different from if he never showed up. Okay. Now, there's the subject of whether this really is going to be Elijah himself, or is this going to be fulfilled by someone else. All right. And that's the discussion at that point. Is it going to be Elijah personally, or can it be someone else? Can it be John the Baptist? All right, I'll come back to that second issue in just a moment. Let's start with the idea of is it going to be Elijah himself personally? And this is a belief that many people have. This is found within the majority of Judaism, which is the people who are the descendants of those who were the recipients of this prophecy from Malachi in around the 4th century BC. And so there is a belief within most Jewish communities of people that this will be Elijah personally who will return. All right. Now, I'll just tell you up front, I don't believe that it will be Elijah personally. And the reason why I don't believe this is because I don't think that God will allow a person who has died previously to come back and be a part of our civilization. All right, I don't believe in these reincarnation ideas, and I don't believe that that once a person dies and goes into the presence of God, that He's going to allow them to have access to anyone who is alive years later. All right. Or any time afterwards. I do believe that there will be a distinct separation that will prevent a person such as Elijah from ever returning. That's my personal belief. I'll tell you that right up front. And so based on that, by default, it's going to have to be someone else from my point of view. All right. Now, there's some other additional things to consider about Elijah. In the scriptures, it says that Elijah was taken up by a whirlwind into heaven. And so based on that belief of that kind of an extraction, all right, because this is a unique extraction, then there is a belief that there can be a unique return. That if Elijah didn't really die physically, but God pulled him out early through this miraculous extraction, well, then Elijah has not completed his physical life. He's been put in this holding area, this delay, and God will allow him to return and complete his physical years. This is what a lot of people believe, especially within Judaism. I, of course, do not subscribe to this belief, but this is a belief that people have. All right? And so people are expecting this because of the unique extraction. Now, from what I can tell as I continue to read in the scriptures, I have the opinion that Elijah was not extracted completely in the way that people would like to believe, right? From what I can tell, Elijah was perhaps caught up by a tornado of some kind, and he was elevated from ground level into the sky, right, into the heavens, but that he was then relocated and placed somewhere else, in effect, out of town, all right, or out of the country. He was relocated by God. God elevated him from the earth through a tornado and took him somewhere else and put him over there. And based on that relocation, it appears that Elijah was not so interested in going back to town, going back to the land that he was removed from because of the divine removal that took place. Hey, let's not go against that and just go back to where it was that God took us from. So Elijah, from what I can tell, he did live the rest of his life physically on earth, and then he died, just like everybody else. But he was somewhere else. All right? Now, it turns out that we have evidence to support this. We do. Okay, we have some evidence to support this, and this is found in 2 Chronicles. Give me a moment as I scroll to find it, where I recorded this. Here it is. 2 Chronicles chapter 21. 2 Chronicles chapter 21, beginning in verse 12, it says that Elijah wrote a letter. He wrote a letter to King Jehoram. I have that correctly, the right king. He wrote it to King Jehoram, and it's recorded in 2 Chronicles about the letter that he wrote. And this is after, all right, this is after the time when Elijah was taken up from earth in an upward direction that we would describe as being in the heavens. It was afterwards. How would Elijah send this letter if he wasn't physically alive, but, just simply relocated out of town? That's what he did, okay? And the letter says in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 12, and a letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, thus says the Lord, God of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat, your father, or in the ways of Asa, king of Judah, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and have made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the harlot like the harlotry of the house of Ahab, and also have killed your brothers and those of your father's household who were better than yourself, behold, the Lord will strike your people with a serious affliction, your children, your wives, and all your possessions. And then he goes on to verse 15 and says something really ugly, all right? So, Elijah was still alive physically based on 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 12, following. We have a letter. We have the record of a letter that he wrote, and this was after he was taken up into the heavens, all right? So on this basis, I would say that Elijah, the person himself, is not expected to return. Okay, the prophecy recorded in Malachi chapter 4 is referring to a person who will fulfill the role of Elijah, or who will be recognized as one who is of Elijah in that context, of the power of the Spirit of. That it will be someone like that, and he will accomplish the task of returning people to the law, giving them inspiration to return to the law of Moses, according to the prophecy. Now look, if it's Elijah himself personally, I'm not going to complain. I won't say, now God, you can't do that. But from what I can tell, it does not appear that it will be the same person. It will instead be a person who fulfills the role and who will be recognized as the person of Elijah. Now, let me advance a little bit and show you what Jesus had to say about this. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 12 through 15, Jesus had something to say about this. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. And that's another question about what would that imply. In verse 13, for all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's what Jesus had to say. Now, this leaves another, question to address. Do you believe Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus? Jesus had a whole lot of things to say about who he is. And, he had a whole lot to say, and he did a whole lot. So if you're going to believe, in most, let's just start with most. If you're going to believe in most of what Jesus had to say, he said this also, is it acceptable to include this comment that he makes about John the Baptist and says, look, if you're willing to receive it, John the Baptist fulfilled the role of Elijah. He is Elijah in that context. He fulfilled the prophecy of Malachi chapter 4. All right? Now, it's okay to not start with this comment by Jesus. and start with everything else that he had to say, and then come back to this later and say, well, based on the fact that we know that Jesus told the truth about all these other things, it's okay to include this, and to say that this is the case, and that John the Baptist fulfilled the role, because you know what? He did, all right? He did. What did he do? According to the prophecy, will he promote the law of Moses and, in effect, return the hearts of the fathers to their children and the children to their fathers, which is another way of saying that they're going to obey the law, all right? And they're going to participate in each other as the law requires. The law has a lot more to say than just the first 10 commandments. All right. In addition, as part of the law, the parents are to teach the children, and it's expected by default that the children will learn from their parents. They will learn the law. And what did John the Baptist do? He taught the law. He restored people to the law. How did he do that? He did that through baptism. All right. Now, I did a whole series of programs that are available in the Living God Ministries radio archive, about 8 hours of content, where I explained the history and purpose of baptism. So there's a whole lot to say about it. I said a whole lot, hours and hours. I'm not going to try to repeat that right now. What's relevant here to this question is that baptism was established by the Pharisees as a means of converting a Gentile to Judaism. And there's a whole lot of history behind that goes all the way back to the Maccabean Wars. So when John was baptizing the people there in the Jordan, all right, baptism was not new. It was known, it was utilized, it was accepted. What was unique about what John was doing was that he was baptizing Jews. All right? And that was totally out of bounds. That was different. That was unique. The Gentiles get baptized. Jews don't get baptized because Jews are already Jews. The Gentiles get baptized to become Jews. That was part of the process of converting into Judaism, to commit yourself to the Mosaic law. All right? That you're going to now live by the Mosaic law. That if you're a child, which everyone is, a child of some parent, their heart will turn to their parents for instruction and guidance concerning how to obey the Mosaic law. And they will teach their children, if they have children, to live in obedience to the Mosaic law. John did that. That's what he was doing. He was baptizing Jews to effectively rededicate their lives, or dedicate their lives if they had never got started really to begin with, to live in obedience to the Mosaic law. He restored all things in this unique context. And in that way, he fulfilled the role that Elijah was expected to fulfill according to Malachi chapter 4. And so because of the fulfillment by the definition of the prophecy, it's reasonable to say that John the Baptist was Elijah by fulfilling the role and by fulfilling the purpose that was defined there, which he did in a unique and profound way. All right. Now, could this perhaps happen again in the future? Maybe it will, And if it's Elijah personally, I'm not going to complain, all right, although I will have my reservations. But if it's someone else who fulfills that role, fine, so be it. But this has to be understood also in the context of a new covenant being in effect. All right. And so because there is a new covenant that is in effect, I don't expect a future event to unfold. As far as I'm concerned, we got a new covenant that's now in effect. There's no reason for God to encourage a return to the Mosaic law in the same way that was fulfilled by John the Baptist, all right? So while, I'm not the one who decides if someone may come or may not come in the future, I don't expect that to be the case because as far as I can tell, this was fulfilled adequately, from my point of view. All right, now there may be some people who may come around later on and they may say, I am the fulfillment of Malachi chapter 4. They may do that. All right, but if they're going to do that, then they need to encourage people to return to the law. But if they do that, then they're going to be rejecting the new covenant that is presently in effect. All right, and if they do that, then I'm going to say they're not of God. All right, I will say that they are not of God if they try to do that now. John the Baptist fulfilled that role just fine because the old covenant was in effect until Jesus died and rose from the dead and provided for forgiveness for the sins of the world. All right, when that happened, then the law has the demands of the law are fulfilled, and there's no reason to return the fathers to their children and the children to their fathers in the context of living in obedience to the Mosaic law. All right? So that's how I would address this issue with regards to, is John the Baptist Elijah, or did he fulfill the role of Elijah? And was the prophecy of Malachi chapter 4 fulfilled, or are we still waiting for it to be fulfilled? All right, if you have any other questions that you can think of I might be helpful with, then do send those questions to me at aaron@aaronbudgeon.net. Thanks.